The galaxy had laughed at the prophecy. The Council of Worlds dismissed the Elder's warning as little more than myth. Humans are unstoppable, the old voices had whispered, their tone carrying the weight of centuries. If you provoke them, if you corner them, nothing in the stars will withstand what comes next. And yet when the fleets gathered, when their war engines blotted out the starlight, they laughed. They laughed at Earth's tiny ships, its scattered colonies, its fragile hope. But laughter cannot hold the line. Arrogance cannot shield a throne. And when the first human answered the Council's mockery with fire and fury, the galaxy discovered what the Elders had truly meant. Because unstoppable was not just strength. It was not just weapons. It was the unyielding will of a people who refused to kneel, no matter the odds. And now the stars themselves trembled, waiting for the outcome of a single, impossible choice. So the question remains, when humanity rises, who will be left standing? In Jaya. Captain Elias Kane had always believed his life would be measured not by victories, but by the silence between them. On Earth, before the war, he had been a teacher. He remembered the chalk on his hands, the quiet murmur of students scribbling notes, and the endless skies over a world that still felt safe. Back then, danger was something written in history books or flickering on distant news feeds. His world had been small: family dinners, long walks by the sea, lessons passed on to the next generation. But peace has a way of shattering without warning. When the Council declared Earth a containment risk, Kane's life ended as a teacher and began again as something else entirely. He was drafted into the defense fleet, not because he was the strongest or the bravest, but because humanity needed every single soul. And Kane, with his quiet patience and stubborn streak, learned quickly that war had no room for hesitation. Now, years later, he stood aboard the bridge of the UNS Resolute, humanity's answer to extinction. The hum of engines, the glow of tactical screens, the faint shiver of bulkheads under acceleration, all of it was his new classroom. But instead of children, he commanded crewmen barely older than the students he once taught. Their eyes looked to him not for knowledge, but for survival. And Kane carried the weight of that trust like an iron chain. Reports had been coming in for weeks: border colonies silent, trade convoys vanishing, refugee ships drifting empty. The Council denied it, insisting on unfortunate anomalies. But Kane knew better. He had seen the dark streaks of burned-out hulls with his own eyes. He had read the encrypted transmissions smuggled by desperate traders. Something was coming, something vast, something the Council believed humanity could never withstand. The Elders had spoken of it, an age-old warning carved into 1,000 forgotten records. Do not awaken the humans. Do not test them. They are the fire that consumes the forest, the tide that reshapes the shore. But the Council laughed at such words. To them, humanity was fragile, too young, too fractured, too few to matter. Kane remembered the night he first read the prophecy himself. He had been in the archives of Luna Command, searching for patterns in the Council's lies, when he found the file. It was simple, almost poetic, a single phrase repeated in dozens of alien tongues. Humanity is unstoppable. At the time, he didn't believe it. How could they be unstoppable when they were so vulnerable, so small compared to empires that spanned galaxies? Yet as he stood now, staring into the endless dark, Kane felt something stirring in his chest. A quiet certainty. Because humanity had always been underestimated. They had always been pushed to the edge of survival, on Earth, in history, in the cold void of space, and always, somehow, they endured. The comms crackled. Captain, long-range sensors detect movement. Multiple signatures. Closing fast. Kane's pulse steadied, not quickened. This was the silence before the storm, the moment between chalk dust and the sound of war drums. He looked around at his crew, nervous, young, afraid, and offered a calm nod. "Steady hands," he said softly. "Remember who you are. Remember what you fight for." No one spoke, but their shoulders straightened, their breaths steadied. They believed in him, and he, in turn, believed in something greater, the quiet, unyielding truth that humanity could not be broken. Outside, the stars shifted. The void rippled with the distortion of incoming ships. Council war cruisers, their hulls bristling with weapons meant to terrify lesser species into surrender. They came like executioners, armored in arrogance, certain of an easy victory. Kane tightened his grip on the railing. Somewhere far beyond those warships, the Elder's prophecy lingered, waiting to be proven right or wrong. The Council had laughed at the warning, but soon the galaxy would learn the hard way. The first ripple of distortion split the darkness, followed by another, and then dozens more. Council warships emerged like predators from the void, their engines glowing with cold authority. Sleek, silver-armored, bristling with weapons that had subdued 100 species before humanity had even walked on the moon. On the bridge of the UNS Resolute, silence reigned. Every eye was fixed on the tactical display as the enemy icons multiplied. "Count," Kane asked, his voice calm, measured. 37 confirmed, sir," his sensor officer whispered. "All heavy cruisers, no escorts. They didn't even bother bringing frigates." The meaning was clear. The Council hadn't come to fight. They'd come to demonstrate power, to show humanity that resistance was nothing but a cruel joke. Kane's jaw tightened. "Signal Fleet Command. Prepare all vessels to defensive posture, formation Omega." The order was acknowledged with a chorus of voices. Across the human flotilla, barely a dozen ships cobbled together from desperate budgets and stolen time, engines flared to life. The Resolute shifted, her armor plates creaking as she took her place at the center of the thin, fragile line. From any rational perspective, it was madness. 12 human ships against 37 Council cruisers, no margin for error, no chance for survival. But Kane knew something the Council didn't. Humanity's strength had never been in numbers. It had been in the stubborn refusal to yield, and in the ingenuity that turned weakness into advantage. He leaned closer to the tactical display. "Helm, adjust course 3 degrees port. Weapons, hold fire until my mark. Comms, open fleet-wide channel." A breath. Silence. Then Kane's voice carried through every speaker, into every cockpit and control room, into the hearts of men and women staring into certain death. "They think this will break us. They think we'll beg for mercy." He let the words hang, heavy with fire. "But we've never been the kind to kneel. Remember Earth. Remember your families. Remember the Elder's words. Humanity is unstoppable. Today, we prove them right." A cheer rose across the fleet, raw and defiant, even as fear twisted in their guts. The Council ships advanced, shields flared, batteries came online. Their formation was flawless, precise, a wall of destruction sweeping forward. "Range closing," the sensor officer said. 2 minutes to engagement." Kane nodded once. His mind raced, not with panic but with calculation. The Council's arrogance was their weakness. They had brought no escorts, no screens, assuming human ships were too fragile to require strategy. They advanced in a solid wall, predictable, overconfident. "Navigation," Kane said softly. "Bring us closer to the debris field." A few officers exchanged glances. The debris field was the shattered remains of an ancient asteroid mining site, a graveyard of twisted rock and metal. Any sane commander would avoid it, fearing collision or ambush. But Kane saw something else. Cover, terrain, opportunity. The Resolute shifted her course. The fleet followed, engines burning hard as they slipped toward the jagged maze of drifting wreckage. Council ships altering course, sensors reported. They're following us in. Kane allowed himself a small smile. Of course they are. The first salvo came like thunder. Dozens of plasma lances and kinetic slugs lit the void, streaking toward the human line. The Resolute shuddered under the impact, shields flaring bright, but they held. For now. "Return fire!" Kane barked. Human guns spat flame. Railguns thundered, missile bays emptied. The void erupted with streaks of light, explosions blooming across the Council formation. A single enemy cruiser staggered under the assault, its shields cracking, but the others pressed forward relentlessly. It wasn't about victory, not yet. It was about survival, about showing the Council that humanity would not fold. The debris field loomed closer, jagged shadows twisting like the bones of ancient giants. Kane gave the order. "All ships, scatter. Draw them in." The human fleet broke formation, darting into the maze of rock and wreckage. Council cruisers followed, weapons blazing, their discipline fraying as the humans disappeared behind cover and re-emerged at deadly angles. It became a dance of chaos. Human ships weaved between asteroids, using them as shields. Council fire blasted apart mountains of rock, but in doing so they cluttered their own formation, creating choke points and blind zones. On the Resolute, Kane directed every move with surgical precision. "Shift 90 degrees starboard. Target Cruiser 7. Focus all railguns. Now!" The Resolute swung from behind cover, its cannons roaring. Slugs tore through a Council cruiser's weakened flank. A moment later, the ship exploded in a violent blossom of fire. The first kill. Cheers erupted across the fleet, but Kane's face remained grim. "Do not celebrate yet. They still outnumber us 3-1. But the balance had shifted. The Council had expected easy prey. Instead, they were being forced into a brawl, their precision broken, their arrogance punished. Minutes stretched like hours. Hulls screamed. Shields flickered. The human fleet bled, but they endured. Ship after ship darted through the debris field, striking like wolves at the heels of giants. Then came the turning point. "Captain!" the comms officer cried. "The Defiance has lost engines! They're drifting!" On the display, one of humanity's frigates spun helplessly, caught in open space. Council guns pivoted toward it like vultures. "Orders, sir." Kane's chest tightened. The logical choice was to abandon the Defiance, sacrifice one ship to save the rest. But logic had never defined humanity. He slammed his fist against the railing. "Helm! Bring us between them! Shields to maximum!" The Resolute surged forward, cutting across the Defiance's path. Plasma fire rained down, hammering the flagship's shields until the bridge shuddered and alarms screamed. "Shields at 30%! Hold!" Kane roared. "Hold the line!" Through the chaos, repair drones launched from the Resolute, latching onto the crippled Defiance and jump-starting its systems. Seconds later, the smaller ship limped back into formation, engines sputtering but alive. Kane exhaled, sweat running down his brow. The cost had been brutal, but the crew of the Defiance lived. That mattered. That was what separated humanity from the cold arithmetic of the Council. But even as hope flickered, doom loomed. "Captain," sensors warned. "Enemy reinforcements incoming. Another fleet. 40 ships." The bridge went silent. 40 more. The scale was unthinkable. Even with ingenuity, even with defiance, they could not hold forever. Kane gripped the railing, his knuckles white. The prophecy burned in his mind. Humanity is unstoppable. But how? How could a species so small defy an empire that spanned galaxies? Then, like a spark in the dark, an idea struck. Not a weapon, not a maneuver, something deeper. Something the Council could never predict. He turned to his officers, his voice steady. "Signal the fleet. Prepare emergency jump drives. Plot coordinates for grid Theta 7. The navigation officer blinked. Sir, that's right into the heart of the pulsar field. Exactly, Kane said. His eyes gleamed with cold fire. They think we're afraid of the impossible. Let's prove them wrong. The fleet shuddered as coordinates locked. Engines screamed with overdrive, shields flickered with strain. On the tactical display, Council cruisers closed in like a steel fist. At the last possible moment, Kane gave the order. Jump! Reality tore open. Light swallowed them whole. The Resolute and her battered fleet vanished into the storm of the pulsar field, an ocean of deadly radiation, gravitational shears, and energy bursts strong enough to tear warships apart. Behind them, the Council followed. The bridge plunged into crimson light as alarms blared. Energy spikes slammed against the hull, shields strained to the brink. But in the chaos, Kane's plan unfolded. Use the pulsars as cover, he barked. Ride the waves, use the bursts to mask signatures. Turn their numbers against them. The humans moved like shadows through the storm, weaving between death itself, surviving where no Council ship should. One by one, enemy cruisers were caught in the pulsar's fury, shields collapsing, hulls ripping apart, screams lost in static. The battlefield became madness, a storm of light and fire, and in that madness, humanity thrived. Cliffhanger. As the fleet danced between annihilation and triumph, Kane stood at the center, his heart steady, his voice unyielding. They had been underestimated, mocked, condemned. But here, in the heart of a storm that should have killed them all, humanity endured. The elders had spoken the truth. The only question left was, would the galaxy survive learning it? The pulsar field was chaos incarnate. Radiation storms pulsed like the heartbeat of dying gods, waves of energy cracking shields and twisting space itself. The Resolute groaned with every surge, her armor plates glowing from the stress, but she pressed on, driven not by logic, but by human will. Behind them, the Council fleet floundered. Precision formations shattered as ships broke apart under tidal forces. Their commanders had never imagined fighting in a place like this, never conceived of turning madness into battlefield. But humans? Humans had been born in chaos. They had built their civilizations on fault lines, in deserts, on the edges of storms. To them, survival was not an anomaly. It was the rule. Kane stood at the center of the storm, hands gripping the railing. Target those cruisers caught in the shear zone. Fire when the pulses align. The order was carried out instantly. Railguns thundered in perfect timing with the pulsar waves. Slugs punched through weakened shields, tearing ships to ribbons. Explosions lit the storm like falling stars. The crew erupted in cheers, but Kane didn't smile. His eyes were fixed on the sensor board where a new signal had appeared, larger than the rest. Sir, the officer's voice faltered. That's a dreadnought. The bridge fell silent. Council dreadnoughts were more fortress than ship. Miles of armored hull, weapons enough to level continents, shield generators powered by stolen suns. One of them could annihilate entire fleets, and it had followed them here. The tactical display flickered as the dreadnought's weapons powered up. Even the pulsar's fury seemed to bend around it, as if the storm itself feared the monster. Range to target? Kane asked. 30,000 kilometers, closing fast. The distance meant nothing. In seconds, they would be in range of weapons that could vaporize the Resolute in a single shot. For the first time, Kane felt the weight of despair pressing against him. Every choice he had made had led here. His crew, his fleet, they had followed him into this storm because they believed in him, because they believed humanity could do the impossible. But against a dreadnought? He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. No. Despair was not an option. Not here. Not ever. "Helm," Kane said quietly. "Bring us about." Directly at the dreadnought. The crew froze. Someone whispered, "Sir, that's suicide." "Not suicide," Kane answered. His voice was steady, calm, unyielding. "A lesson. For them. For the galaxy. They think humanity can be broken. We'll show them the truth." The Resolute turned, her battered hull groaning in protest, her shields flickering under the storm. But she turned, and the human fleet turned with her, limping ships aligning behind their flagship like wolves preparing to strike a bear. The dreadnought loomed ahead, its size dwarfing everything around it. Its first volley came like a sun erupting, beams of annihilation slicing through the storm. A human frigate vanished in fire, another crippled. Still they pressed on. Kane's voice cut through the chaos. "Synchronize fire on my mark. We hit their forward shield projector. If we break it, even for a moment, the pulsar will do the rest." The crew's hands flew across consoles, weapons charged, targeting locked. The dreadnought fired again. The Resolute shuddered as a beam grazed her hull, carving molten scars into her plating. Klaxons wailed, fires raged, but Kane stood tall. His voice was a steel blade in the storm. "Mark!" The fleet unleashed hell. Railguns, missiles, energy lances, every weapon fired in perfect unity. The void blazed with fury as projectiles hammered the dreadnought's forward shield. For a moment, it held. For a heartbeat, it defied them. Then it cracked. The shield collapsed in a flash of light. The dreadnought was exposed, just as the next pulsar wave struck. The storm tore into the behemoth, ripping through armor, shredding systems. The dreadnought convulsed, its colossal frame bending under forces it was never meant to endure. Explosions erupted across its hull, one after another, until the giant tore itself apart in a fireball brighter than any star. The bridge of the Resolute shook with the blast wave, consoles sparking, crew shielding their eyes from the glare. When the light faded, nothing remained of the dreadnought but drifting wreckage. Silence. Then, slowly, the humans realized what they had done. They had slain a god of war. Cheers erupted across the fleet, ragged and desperate, tears mingling with laughter. In the storm of annihilation, humanity had stood unbroken. Kane allowed himself one breath of relief. Just one. Then his eyes hardened again, because this wasn't over. Not yet. Sensors pinged with fresh contacts. Council ships still filled the void, fewer now, but enough to end them if given the chance. And beyond this battle, beyond this storm, lay the Council itself, watching, waiting, laughing still. Kane stepped forward, his voice carrying across the bridge. They thought the elders were wrong. They thought humanity would kneel. But today, we've shown them the truth. We've shown them what unstoppable means. His crew stood straighter, their eyes blazing with the same fire that burned in him. The comms officer looked up. "Captain, what are your orders?" Kane stared at the wreckage of the dreadnought, at the storm raging around them, at the countless stars beyond. His voice was low, but every word struck like a hammer. "Tell the galaxy, humanity does not run. Humanity does not break. We rise." Outside, the pulsar flared, a cosmic heartbeat echoing the defiance of a species that refused to die. The elders had spoken the truth. Humanity was unstoppable. And now, the Council knew it. But the question lingered in the silence that followed. If humanity could slay dreadnoughts in the heart of a storm, what would they do next? The war should have ended with Earth's silence. The council had wagered everything on fear, that if they struck hard enough, if they shattered enough worlds, humanity would finally bow. But what they hadn't understood was that humans do not break. They forge. When the dust of Jericho 7 finally cleared, the truth stood undeniable. The council's flagship, its engines torn apart by a single human cruiser running on fumes, hung gutted in orbit. The proudest symbol of alien supremacy reduced to a burning husk. And beside it, the human fleet, scarred, bloodied, but still standing, formed a defiant line across the stars. Every broadcast in the galaxy carried the same image, a handful of human survivors holding the line where no one else dared. And across the worlds, whispers began to rise. Whispers of the prophecy, of the elders' words, of what it meant to call a species unstoppable. Because the truth was no longer myth. It was visible in every scarred ship, every soldier who refused to yield, every world that still dared to fly Earth's banner. The galaxy had expected vengeance. What they received was something worse for their pride and far more dangerous. Hope. Hope that the council could be defied. Hope that oppression was not eternal. Hope carried not by fleets of thousands, but by a people who had clawed their way up from the mud and refused to be told where their journey ended. On a quiet carrier's deck, Commander Elias stood among his weary crew. They had no victory speeches prepared, no parades waiting, just silence, and the weight of history pressing on their shoulders. A junior officer broke the silence first, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "We actually did it, sir. Against them. We held." Elias only nodded. His gaze drifted out the viewport to the burning wreck of the council flagship. He thought of the elders' words, dismissed for so long. Humans are unstoppable. Not because of their ships, not because of their weapons, but because they carried something no empire had ever understood, the will to endure, to rise, to fight for one another when everything else had fallen. Somewhere across the galaxy, the council was already gathering the pieces, scheming their next move. But they would never again laugh at Earth's name. The myth had become truth, the truth had become fear, and fear had become respect. Elias finally spoke, his voice steady despite the ache in every bone. "Tell the galaxy what happened here. Not for glory, not for revenge. Tell them so they know. Humanity doesn't stop." And in the silence that followed, those words traveled farther than any weapon could reach. They would echo in every council chamber, every rebel cell, every distant world waiting for a sign that the impossible could be done. Because now the sign was here. The elders had spoken true. The council had laughed, and the galaxy would never laugh again.